Beep, beep, then silence. Rebecca Sullivan was 8 months pregnant when the oxygen suddenly stopped flowing during labor. Her husband Jonathan arrived 15 minutes later, perfectly dressed, claiming he rushed from an emergency board meeting. But something felt wrong, very wrong. Her doula Sarah, a former Navy hospital corpsman, made a chilling discovery. The oxygen valve hadn't malfunctioned. Someone had deliberately turned it off. Someone who knew exactly how medical equipment worked. Someone who wanted Rebecca and her unborn baby dead, but who would try to murder a pregnant woman in a hospital. And why the answer would shatter everything Rebecca thought she knew about her marriage, her safety, and the man she trusted most in the world. This is the true story of how a CEO's greed, his mistress's ambition, and $1 million life insurance policy turned a delivery room into a crime scene. It's a story of survival, betrayal, and the unlikely hero whose military training saved 2 lives that should have been lost forever. Stay with me, because what happens next will prove that sometimes the most dangerous person in your life is the one lying next to you at night. Beep, beep, beep. The sharp medical alarm cut through the sterile air of labor in delivery room 12. Then silence. Something's wrong. Sarah Mitchell's voice carried the authority of someone who had saved lives in far worse conditions. The oxygen isn't flowing. Rebecca Sullivan gripped the bed rails as another contraction peaked. 8 months of perfect prenatal care. Vitamins taken religiously. Every appointment kept. Every test passed with flying colors. And now, during the most critical moments of bringing her daughter into the world, the equipment simply stopped working. Sarah's hands moved with practiced efficiency. Former Navy hospital corpsman, current doula. Always prepared for the unexpected. She checked the oxygen flow meter, then the main valve, then the backup connections. Nothing made sense. "The valve's been turned off manually," Sarah said, her military training evident in her calm assessment. "This doesn't just happen." Rebecca's breathing became labored without the supplemental oxygen. Her lips tinged slightly blue. The baby's heart rate monitor showed stress patterns that made Dr. Patricia Hoffman rush into the room. "What's the situation?" Dr. Hoffman demanded. "Oxygen failure," Sarah replied, already switching to emergency protocols. "I'm providing manual assistance, but we need to restore flow immediately." Dr. Hoffman examined the equipment with growing concern. In 20 years of obstetrics, she had never seen this specific type of malfunction. The safety lock was disengaged. The main valve was completely closed. Both required deliberate, separate actions. "Get respiratory therapy up here now," Dr. Hoffman ordered the nurse. "And check every other oxygen outlet on this floor." Rebecca closed her eyes and focused on her breathing pattern. In for 3, hold for 3, out for 3. The same rhythm she had taught countless pediatric patients when they were scared and needed to calm down. She had never imagined using it to save her own life. Sarah worked to manually restore the oxygen flow while keeping one eye on Rebecca's vitals. Her Navy training had prepared her for medical emergencies in combat zones. This felt uncomfortably similar. "There," Sarah said as oxygen began flowing again. "You should feel relief in about 30 seconds. Rebecca's color improved almost immediately. The baby's heart rate stabilized, but Sarah's expression remained troubled. "How long was the oxygen off, Dr. Hoffman asked. "Maybe 2 minutes total," Sarah replied. "I caught it fast." "Thank God you were here," Rebecca whispered. "If I'd been alone..." Sarah squeezed Rebecca's hand. "You weren't alone. That's why I'm here." But Sarah's mind was racing. 2 separate safety mechanisms had failed simultaneously. In her medical experience, equipment didn't malfunction like this. Someone had deliberately turned off the oxygen. The question was who and why. Jonathan Sullivan arrived 15 minutes later, playing the role of panicked husband perfectly. His dark suit was immaculate despite his claims of rushing from an emergency board meeting. His tie was straight, his hair was perfect. "Is she okay? Is the baby okay?" John asked, but his eyes scanned the room rather than focusing on Rebecca. "Both mother and baby are fine," Dr. Hoffman said. "We had a brief equipment malfunction, but it's resolved." "Equipment malfunction," John repeated. "That's concerning. Should we transfer to a different hospital?" "That won't be necessary," Sarah interjected. "The oxygen is flowing normally now." John's gaze lingered on Sarah for a moment too long. And you are Sarah Mitchell, Rebecca's doula. Ah, yes, the doula. John's tone carried a hint of dismissal. Rebecca insisted on hiring outside help. Rebecca felt that familiar pang of invalidation. John had questioned her decision to hire a doula from the beginning. He said the hospital staff was sufficient. He said she was being overcautious. He said a lot of things that made her feel foolish for wanting extra support. I'm glad I did, Rebecca said firmly. Sarah saved my life today. John moved to Rebecca's bedside and kissed her forehead. The gesture looked loving to observers, but Rebecca felt the coldness behind it. His lips barely touched her skin. I'm just grateful everything worked out, John said. The board meeting was incredibly important, but of course I came as soon as I could. Sarah made a mental note. John had mentioned a board meeting twice now. In crisis situations, people usually focused on the crisis, not on justifying their delay in responding to it. Mr. Sullivan, Sarah said, were you aware that your wife was scheduled for augmented oxygen during labor? Augmented oxygen? John looked confused. I thought that was only for high-risk pregnancies. Dr. Hoffman exchanged a glance with Sarah. They had discussed Rebecca's birth plan extensively. John had been present for multiple appointments where the oxygen protocol was explained. We discussed this at your last 3 visits, Dr. Hoffman said gently. Rebecca's pregnancy is low risk, but we use supplemental oxygen as a precaution during prolonged labor. Of course, John said quickly. I remember now. I've been so focused on work lately. Rebecca organized her hospital bag items during the brief lull between contractions. Phone charger in the side pocket, extra underwear in the main compartment, baby's first outfit carefully folded on top. The nesting instinct felt stronger than ever, despite the crisis. Maybe because of it. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend. How's labor going? Thinking of you. Rebecca started to type a response, then stopped. How could she explain that someone had tried to cut off her oxygen? It sounded paranoid, impossible, like something from a movie. But Sarah had seen it too. Sarah knew what she was talking about. Dr. Hoffman, Sarah said quietly, I'd like to document the equipment failure for the hospital's quality assurance review. Absolutely, Dr. Hoffman agreed. I'll make sure maintenance preserves the oxygen valve for inspection. John's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Is all that really necessary? Rebecca's fine. The baby's fine. These things happen. Actually, they don't, Sarah said. This type of failure requires investigation. Another contraction hit Rebecca with full force. She gripped John's hand and focused on her breathing. 3 in, 3 hold, 3 out. But even through the pain, she noticed how quickly John pulled his hand away once the contraction passed. I should make some calls, John said. Let people know what's happening. The first person you should call is your mother, Rebecca suggested. She'll want to know about the equipment problem. Mother doesn't need to worry about medical details, John replied. I'll keep it simple. Sarah helped Rebecca adjust her position for the next phase of labor. As she did, she noticed something on the floor near the oxygen controls, a hospital employee badge. She palmed it quickly, planning to examine it later. Rebecca, Sarah said, you're doing beautifully. The baby's heartbeat is strong and steady. Thank you for being here, Rebecca whispered. I know something was wrong with that equipment. I'm not paranoid. You're absolutely not paranoid, Sarah confirmed. Trust your instincts. They're trying to keep you and your baby safe. Dr. Hoffman returned with the respiratory therapist, who conducted a thorough examination of all oxygen equipment in the room. Everything tested normal. Too normal. It's like someone reset everything to proper functioning, the technician said. But the safety logs show the equipment was definitely compromised earlier. John stepped into the hallway to make his calls. Through the partially open door, Rebecca could hear fragments of conversation. Everything's under control now. Yes, the timing was unfortunate. No, nothing suspicious. Sarah studied the employee badge she had found. Madison Pierce, marketing director. But what was a marketing director doing in labor and delivery? And why was her badge on the floor near the oxygen controls? Rebecca's contractions were intensifying. The baby was coming, whether the mysterious equipment failure was resolved or not. But Sarah remained vigilant. Something felt fundamentally wrong about the whole situation. Dr. Hoffman, Sarah said, I recommend we station someone in this room at all times until delivery is complete. That's not standard protocol, Dr. Hoffman replied. Neither is deliberate oxygen valve tampering, Sarah said quietly. Dr. Hoffman looked at Sarah with new understanding. You really think someone did this intentionally? I know they did. The question is whether they'll try again. Rebecca heard the exchange despite her focus on labor progression, fear mixed with determination. Someone had tried to hurt her and her baby, but they had failed, and now she had allies who believed her. The oxygen flowed steadily. The baby's heart rate remained strong. But Sarah kept one hand near the emergency call button and her eyes on the door. If someone came back to finish what they had started, they would have to go through a former Navy corpsman first. 23 minutes after the oxygen was restored, Madison Pierce appeared in the doorway of room 12. She carried a small bouquet of white roses and wore the concerned expression of someone offering support. Rebecca, I heard about the medical emergency, Madison said, stepping into the room uninvited. I wanted to make sure you were okay. Sarah immediately positioned herself between Madison and the oxygen controls. Her military instincts were screaming warnings. This was the woman whose badge she had found on the floor. Madison, Rebecca said, surprised. What are you doing here? John texted me about the equipment malfunction. I was so worried. Madison's eyes darted around the room, taking in every detail. These things can be so dangerous. John had texted his marketing director about his wife's medical emergency. Rebecca felt a cold realization settle in her stomach. John barely texted her during the day, but he had time to update Madison Pierce. That's very thoughtful, Rebecca said carefully, but I'm fine now. Madison moved closer to the bed, her movements deliberate and practiced. She had been in this room before. Sarah was certain of it. I brought flowers, Madison said, placing the arrangement on the bedside table. White roses for new beginnings. Sarah examined the bouquet while pretending to adjust Rebecca's pillows. Hidden among the stems was a small electronic device, a listening device, or worse, a camera. Madison, how did you know which room Rebecca was in? Sarah asked directly. Madison's smile faltered for just a moment. John told me, of course. But visiting hours are restricted, Dr. Hoffman said, returning to check on Rebecca's progress. Family only during active labor. Oh, I hope I'm not breaking any rules, Madison said with practiced innocence. I just felt so terrible about the equipment failure. These old hospitals can have such unreliable systems. Sarah caught the implication immediately. Madison was suggesting the equipment failure was due to hospital negligence, not sabotage. She was already building a cover story. Actually, Sarah said, pulling out Madison's employee badge. You dropped this earlier. The color drained from Madison's face. That's not mine. Madison Pierce, marketing director, Sarah read aloud. Seems pretty specific. I must have lost it days ago, Madison said quickly. I didn't even realize it was missing. Dr. Hoffman stepped forward. Ms. Pierce, I need to ask you to leave. We're in the middle of active labor, and only immediate family is allowed. Of course, Madison said, backing toward the door. Rebecca, I hope everything goes smoothly from here. As Madison left, Sarah noticed her hands were shaking. Guilt, fear, or both. Dr. Hoffman, Sarah said quietly, we need to call hospital security. That woman was in this room earlier, and she just placed a surveillance device in those flowers. Dr. Hoffman's expression hardened. Are you certain? Sarah carefully extracted the small camera from the bouquet. Navy training included counter-surveillance. This is sophisticated equipment. Rebecca watched the exchange with growing horror. Madison works for John's company. Why would she be spying on me? The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was too terrible to fully comprehend. John's behavior, Madison's presence, the oxygen failure, the surveillance device. Rebecca, Sarah said gently, I need to ask you something important. Has John been acting differently lately? Rebecca thought about the question while another contraction built. He's been working late every night for months, taking calls at strange hours. He said it was a big project. Has he mentioned Madison specifically? All the time. Madison this, Madison that. She's apparently brilliant at her job. Dr. Hoffman was already on the phone with security. I need someone in labor and delivery immediately. We have a situation in room 12. Sarah sat beside Rebecca's bed. I know this is overwhelming, especially during labor, but I need you to trust me. I think someone is trying to hurt you. But why? Rebecca asked. I don't have enemies. I'm just a pediatric nurse having a baby. Sometimes the people closest to us are the most dangerous, Sarah said carefully. Rebecca's phone buzzed with another text. John again. How much longer do you think this will take? I have another meeting at 4. Another meeting. During his wife's labor, Rebecca stared at the message, feeling like she was seeing her husband clearly for the first time. He's having an affair, Rebecca said suddenly. John's having an affair with Madison. The words hung in the air like a diagnosis. True, undeniable, devastating. That would explain her access to your medical information, Sarah said, and her interest in your birth plan. But the oxygen… Anuram, Rebecca started. If something happened to you during childbirth, Sarah said gently, John would inherit your life insurance. He'd be free to marry Madison. Dr. Hoffman returned from her call. Security is reviewing all badge access to this floor. They're also checking surveillance footage. Rebecca felt like she was drowning. The man she had trusted with her life was trying to take it. The woman bringing her flowers was helping him. And she was completely vulnerable, in labor, with nowhere to run. I need to call my sister-in-law, Rebecca said. Grace needs to know what's happening. Sarah handed Rebecca her phone. Good instinct. Build your support network. Grace Sullivan answered on the second ring. Rebecca, how's labor going? Grace, I need help. Something's very wrong. Rebecca's voice shook as she explained the oxygen failure, Madison's presence, and her growing suspicions about John. I'm leaving my office right now, Grace said immediately. Don't be alone with John. Do you hear me? Don't be alone with him? Grace, what aren't you telling me? There was a long pause. I hired a private investigator 3 months ago. I suspected John was involved with someone from his company. I have evidence. Rebecca's world tilted. Grace had known. The signs had been obvious enough that John's own sister had investigated him. Why didn't you tell me? I wanted to be sure before I destroyed your marriage. I never imagined it would escalate to this. Dr. Hoffman checked Rebecca's cervix. You're at 7 centimeters. The baby's coming soon. Rebecca felt trapped between two realities. In one, she was bringing her daughter into the world surrounded by love and support. In the other, she was fighting for her life against her husband and his lover. Grace is coming, Rebecca told Sarah. She has evidence about the affair. Good. We'll need all the help we can get. John returned from his extended phone call, looking frustrated. How much longer is this going to take? I have important business to handle. Your wife is in labor, Dr. Hoffman said sharply. That is your important business. Of course, John said quickly. I just meant I need to reschedule some meetings. Sarah watched John's body language carefully. No excitement about meeting his daughter. No concern for Rebecca's comfort. Just impatience and distraction. John, Rebecca said. Madison stopped by earlier. John's expression didn't change, but Sarah noticed his hands clenched slightly. That was nice of her. She's very thoughtful. She brought flowers with a camera hidden inside, Sarah said bluntly. Now John reacted. That's ridiculous. Why would Madison have a camera? You tell me, Sarah replied. The oxygen alarm suddenly sounded again. Sarah lunged for the controls, but this time she was ready. She caught the valve being turned off and immediately restored flow. Someone just tried again, Sarah announced. The valve was manually adjusted. Dr. Hoffman was already hitting the emergency call button. That's it. We're moving Rebecca to a secure room. That's completely unnecessary, John protested. You're all being paranoid. Mr. Sullivan, Dr. Hoffman said firmly. Your wife has now experienced 2 separate oxygen failures during labor. That doesn't happen by accident. Security arrived as they were preparing to move Rebecca. The head of security, a retired police officer named Detective Michael Torres, took charge immediately. I understand we have a pattern of equipment tampering, Torres said. 2 separate incidents, Sarah confirmed. Both times someone manually shut off the oxygen valve. Torres examined the equipment and the room layout. This requires someone with access to the room and knowledge of medical equipment. How many people have been in and out? Medical staff? family, and one unauthorized visitor. Dr. Hoffman said. Madison Pierce from Mr. Sullivan's company. I'll need to speak with everyone, Torres said. But first, let's get the mother to a secure location. They moved Rebecca to a private room with restricted access. John followed, complaining about the inconvenience and expense. His priorities were becoming clearer by the hour. As they settled into the new room, Rebecca felt another massive contraction building. But this time, she wasn't afraid of the equipment failing. She was afraid of what they would discover about the man she had married. "The baby's coming," Dr. Hoffman announced. "Regardless of everything else, this little girl wants to meet the world." Rebecca gripped Sarah's hand. "Stay with me. Don't leave me alone with him." "I'm not going anywhere," Sarah promised. In the hallway, Torres was already reviewing security footage and badge access logs. What he found would change everything. Madison Pierce had been in the hospital for over 2 hours before Rebecca's labor began. She had used her marketing director credentials to access restricted areas, and she hadn't been alone. The conspiracy was bigger than anyone had imagined. "Push, Rebecca. Your daughter wants to meet you." Dr. Hoffman's voice cut through the chaos of the last hour. Despite everything, the oxygen failures, the surveillance device, the growing realization that her husband wanted her dead, Rebecca's body was doing what it was designed to do. "I can see her head," Sarah said, tears in her eyes. "She's beautiful." Rebecca pushed with everything she had, fueled by a fierce maternal instinct that had been awakened by the threats against both their lives. This baby would not become an orphan because of John's greed and Madison's ambition. "One more push," Dr. Hoffman encouraged. At 3:27 in the afternoon, Emma Grace Sullivan entered the world with a strong cry that filled the secure labor room. Rebecca collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted but triumphant. "She's perfect," Sarah whispered, helping to place Emma on Rebecca's chest. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and the lungs of a future Navy corpsman. Rebecca counted Emma's fingers instinctively. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The same obsessive verification she had done with every pediatric patient, making sure nothing was missing, nothing was wrong. John stepped forward to see his daughter, but his expression was unreadable. No tears of joy, no overwhelming emotion, just a detached observation of a task completed. "She's small," John said. "She's perfect," Rebecca corrected firmly. Dr. Hoffman completed the delivery and began the standard post-birth procedures, but the celebration felt muted by the dark reality hanging over them. Detective Torres knocked on the door. "Mrs. Sullivan, I need to brief you on what we've discovered." Grace Sullivan burst through the door at the same moment, her face flushed from running through the hospital corridors. Rebecca Grace embraced her sister-in-law carefully, mindful of the newborn. "I came as soon as I could. How are you? How's the baby? We're alive," Rebecca said simply. "Thanks to Sarah." Grace looked at her brother with undisguised suspicion. "John, we need to talk." "Not now, Grace. Rebecca just gave birth. This isn't the time for family drama." "Actually," Detective Torres interjected, "this is exactly the time. Mr. Sullivan, I need you to come with me for questioning." John's facade finally cracked. "Questioning about what I haven't done anything wrong." "Your employee badge was used to access restricted areas of this hospital," Torres said. "Your company credit card was used to purchase surveillance equipment, and your marketing director has been caught on camera tampering with medical equipment." The room fell silent except for Emma's soft breathing against Rebecca's chest. "I want a lawyer," John said. "That's your right," Torres replied. "But first I need to secure the safety of your wife and daughter." Grace stepped forward with a manila folder. "Detective Torres, I think this will help your investigation." She handed him photographs, financial records, and detailed surveillance reports. John's face went white as he recognized the contents. "This is a 3-month investigation into John's activities," Grace explained. "Financial irregularities at his company, regular meetings with Madison Pierce at hotels, and recently, life insurance policy reviews." Rebecca felt like she was watching her life through someone else's eyes. The man holding her hand during prenatal appointments, the man who had painted the nursery, the man who had seemed excited about becoming a father. All of it was a performance. How long? Rebecca asked quietly. At least 8 months, Grace said gently. I'm sorry, Rebecca. I wanted to be absolutely certain before I said anything. 8 months. Rebecca had been 8 months pregnant. John had been planning this since the beginning of her pregnancy. Sarah wrapped a warm blanket around Rebecca and Emma. I know this is overwhelming, but you're safe now. Both of you. Detective Torres was reading through Grace's evidence with growing amazement. This is incredibly thorough documentation. Were you planning to file charges? I was planning to help Rebecca file for divorce, Grace said. I never imagined it would escalate to attempted murder. John stood frozen in the corner of the room, watching his carefully constructed plan unravel in real time. His phone buzzed constantly with calls and texts that he didn't answer. Mr. Sullivan, Torres said, I'm placing you under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder. This is insane, John protested. I would never hurt Rebecca. I love her. You tried to kill her twice in one day, Sarah said bluntly. That's not love. That's attempted murder. As Torres read John his rights, Rebecca felt a strange sense of relief washing over her. The gaslighting was over. The confusion was over. The truth was finally visible to everyone. Emma stirred against her chest, making tiny newborn sounds. Rebecca looked down at her daughter's perfect face and made a silent promise. This little girl would never question her own reality the way Rebecca had been forced to. Rebecca, Grace said, sitting beside the bed. I have preliminary divorce papers prepared. If you're ready, we can start the process immediately. What about Emma? Will John have custody rights? Given what's happened today, I doubt any judge would grant him unsupervised visitation, Grace said, especially with the attempted murder charges. Dr. Hoffman finished her examination of Emma and handed her back to Rebecca. Both mother and baby are perfectly healthy. No lasting effects from the oxygen incidents. Off. Rebecca kissed Emma's forehead, breathing in that perfect newborn smell. Thank you for fighting for us today. Ma'am, Detective Torres said, I'll need a detailed statement from you when you're feeling up to it. But for now, just focus on recovering and bonding with your daughter. As the official entourage left the room, Rebecca was finally alone with Grace and Sarah, the three women who had saved her life in different ways. I keep thinking about signs I missed, Rebecca said. He was so distant during the pregnancy. Always working late, always on his phone. Abusers are skilled at making their victims doubt their own perceptions, Sarah said. It's not your fault that you trusted your husband. Grace squeezed Rebecca's hand. The important thing is that you're both safe now. John can't hurt you anymore. But even as Grace spoke the words, Rebecca wondered if they were true. John was wealthy, connected, and desperate. Men like that didn't give up easily. Emma opened her eyes for the first time, looking directly at Rebecca with the unfocused gaze of a newborn trying to make sense of the world. Welcome to the world, sweetheart, Rebecca whispered. It's complicated and dangerous, but there are people who will fight to keep you safe. Sarah checked her watch. Visiting hours are ending soon. I can stay overnight if you'd like. Extra security. Would you? Rebecca asked gratefully. I don't think I can handle being alone tonight. Of course. I'll sleep in the chair. Old Navy habit. Grace gathered her purse and the legal documents. I'll start processing the divorce papers tonight. By morning, John won't have any legal claim to your decisions or Emma's care. After Grace left, Rebecca and Sarah settled into the quiet rhythm of new motherhood. Emma nursed successfully. Rebecca's body began the slow process of recovery. And for the first time in months, Rebecca felt truly safe. Sarah, Rebecca said as evening light faded from the hospital window. How did you know about the oxygen valve? Combat medicine teaches you to trust your instincts. Sarah replied. Equipment failures follow patterns. What happened today wasn't a pattern. It was sabotage. If you hadn't been here, but I was here. That's what matters. Rebecca looked down at Emma sleeping peacefully in her arms. Her daughter would grow up knowing that when danger came, there were people who stood between her and harm. It wasn't the birth story Rebecca had planned, but it was a story of survival, protection, and unexpected heroism. And it was just the beginning. Outside the hospital room, Detective Torres was building a case that would ensure John Sullivan never had the chance to hurt anyone again. Madison Pierce was already in custody, her confession providing evidence of a conspiracy that reached deeper than anyone had imagined. But Rebecca didn't know about any of that yet. For now, she was simply a new mother, holding her healthy daughter, surrounded by people who had risked everything to keep them both alive. The monitors beeped steadily, the oxygen flowed without interruption, and Emma Sullivan began her life in a world where people had already proven they would fight for her safety. Madison Pierce sat in interrogation room 2, her hands shaking as she stared at the evidence spread across the metal table. Photos of her entering restricted hospital areas, receipts for surveillance equipment purchased with John's company credit card, text messages detailing the timing of Rebecca's labor. Detective Torres had seen many criminals break under pressure, but Madison's collapse was particularly swift. "I want to make a deal," Madison said for the third time in 20 minutes. "Talk first," Torres replied. "Then we'll discuss deals." Madison's perfectly applied makeup was smudged from crying. Her designer blouse was wrinkled from hours in custody. The confident marketing director persona had completely disappeared. "It was John's idea," Madison said. "All of it. He said if something happened to Rebecca during childbirth, it would look natural. Medical complications. These things happen." Torres leaned forward. "How long have you been planning this?" "Since February, when Rebecca told him she was pregnant." The timeline made Torres's stomach turn. John Sullivan had been planning his wife's murder for the entire pregnancy. "Walk me through the plan." Madison took a shaky breath. "John said Rebecca's life insurance policy was worth $1 million. If she died during childbirth, he'd inherit everything, and we could be together openly. And your role? I was supposed to cause complications during labor, make it look like equipment failure, hospital negligence." Madison's voice dropped to a whisper. "We researched everything. Oxygen deprivation during labor, how long it would take, what it would look like." Torres felt sick. "You researched how to murder a pregnant woman?" "It wasn't supposed to be murder," Madison protested. "It was supposed to be an accident." "That's still murder, Ms. Pierce." The door opened and Grace Sullivan entered with Rebecca's statement. Torres had called her as soon as Madison started talking. "Ms. Pierce," Grace said, her voice ice cold. "My sister-in-law nearly died today. Her baby nearly died. Because you wanted to steal her husband and her life?" Madison couldn't meet Grace's eyes. "I know how it looks." "I know how it is," Grace corrected. "You're a would-be murderer." Torres spread out additional evidence. "We found the magnetic device you used to disable the oxygen valve. Your fingerprints are all over it. John gave me that. He said it would just cause a temporary malfunction. It nearly killed 2 people. Grace leaned across the table. "Where is John now?" "I don't know," Madison said quickly. "He stopped answering my calls after the second attempt failed." Torres and Grace exchanged glances. John Sullivan was running. Back at the hospital, Rebecca was learning to navigate new motherhood while processing the complete destruction of her old life. Emma nursed eagerly, her tiny fist gripping Rebecca's finger with surprising strength. "She knows she's safe with you?" Sarah observed from her chair beside the bed. "I keep thinking about what could have happened," Rebecca said. "If you hadn't been here, if you hadn't caught the oxygen being shut off." "But I was here, and I did catch it." Rebecca's phone rang. Grace's number. "How are you holding up?" Grace asked without preamble. "Better now that Emma's here safe. What's happening with John?" Grace's pause was ominous. "He's missing. He never came to the police station for questioning. His car is gone and his credit cards haven't been used." Fear crept back into Rebecca's chest. "He's running. It looks that way." But Rebecca, Madison confessed to everything. She gave us details about the whole plan. John can't hide from this. Sarah was already moving to the window, checking the parking lot with trained eyes. "How long has he been missing?" "About 4 hours," Grace said over the phone speaker. "He's desperate now," Sarah said grimly. "Desperate people do unpredictable things." Dr. Hoffman knocked and entered the room. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but hospital security wants to move you to a different floor. Just as a precaution." Rebecca felt Emma's weight against her chest. Her daughter was 12 hours old and already living under protection from her own father. "How is this my life?" Rebecca asked no one in particular. "This is your survival," Sarah corrected. You're not a victim anymore. You're a woman who fought back and won. They moved to the fourth floor, to a room that required special access codes. 2 security guards were posted in the hallway. Rebecca felt like a prisoner, but she knew she was actually being protected. Grace arrived an hour later with more news and a bag of Rebecca's clothes from home. I went to the house, Grace said. John's study was completely cleaned out, computer gone, files gone, safe emptied. What was in the safe? According to the house manager, important documents, birth certificates, passports, bank account information. Rebecca felt a chill. He's planning to disappear completely. It looks that way, but Rebecca, the FBI is involved now. Interstate flight to avoid prosecution. They'll find him. Emma stirred and opened her eyes, looking around the room with curious newborn attention. Rebecca marveled at how alert she seemed, how aware of her surroundings. She has your eyes, Grace said softly. Thank God she doesn't have his, Rebecca replied. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. Her expression changed as she read it. What is it? Rebecca asked. Hospital security. John's been spotted in the parking garage. The room fell silent except for the soft sounds of Emma breathing against Rebecca's chest. Call Detective Torres, Grace said immediately. But before Sarah could dial, the lights in the room went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in an eerie red glow. Emma started crying, sensing the tension in the room. Lock the door, Sarah ordered Grace while pulling out her phone's flashlight, but the door wouldn't lock. The electronic system was down. He's in the building, Sarah said grimly, and he's taken out the power to this section. Rebecca felt terror unlike anything she'd experienced during labor. At least then, the threat had been hidden. Now it was closing in, and she had nowhere to run. What do we do? Rebecca whispered. Sarah's military training took over completely. We fight. She moved furniture to barricade the door, while Grace called 911 on her cell phone. Rebecca held Emma close and tried to control her breathing. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Slow, deliberate, searching. John Sullivan had come to finish what Madison had started, but this time, he would have to go through 3 women who had already proven they would do anything to protect Emma. The footsteps stopped outside their door. The door handle turned slowly in the red emergency lighting. Rebecca held Emma against her chest and moved to the far corner of the room, while Sarah positioned herself between the door and the bed. John, Grace called out. I know you're there. The police are on their way. Open the door. Grace. John's voice was different now. Desperate. Dangerous. I just want to see my daughter. Your daughter? Rebecca found her voice despite her fear. You tried to kill your daughter. That's not true. I would never hurt Emma. Sarah had wedged a chair under the door handle, but it wouldn't hold for long against a determined assault. John, Sarah said loudly, I'm a former Navy corpsman. I know hand-to-hand combat. Walk away now. John laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're one woman with a newborn baby. I'm not afraid of you. You should be, Sarah replied calmly. Grace was whispering urgently into her phone, giving their exact location to emergency dispatch. But Rebecca knew the police were at least 10 minutes away. John was here now. Rebecca, John called through the door. I love you. I love Emma. We can work this out. By trying to murder us, Rebecca shot back. That's not love. John, that's possession. Emma was crying now, sensing the fear and tension in the room. Rebecca swayed gently, trying to calm her daughter while keeping watch on the door. I never wanted to hurt you, John said. Madison convinced me it was the only way. Madison confessed. John, Grace said. She told the police everything. How you planned this for months, how you researched ways to kill Rebecca during childbirth. The door shook as John threw his weight against it. The chair held, but barely. You don't understand the pressure I was under, John said. The company was failing. I needed the insurance money. Rebecca felt a cold clarity wash over her. So you decided to kill your wife and unborn child for money? It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Another impact against the door. This time, the chair slipped. Sarah grabbed a metal bedpan from the medical supply cart. Rebecca, take Emma into the bathroom and lock the door. I'm not leaving you to fight him alone. Yes, you are. Protect your daughter. Rebecca reluctantly moved toward the bathroom with Emma, but she couldn't bring herself to abandon Sarah and Grace completely. The door burst open. John stood in the doorway, disheveled and wild-eyed. His expensive suit was wrinkled and stained. His perfect hair was a mess. He looked like a man who had lost everything and had nothing left to lose. "There's my beautiful wife," John said, his tone sickeningly sweet. "And my perfect daughter." "Stay back," Sarah warned, raising the bedpan like a weapon. John pulled a scalpel from his jacket pocket. He must have stolen it from a medical supply room. "I didn't want it to come to this," John said, "but you've all made it impossible." Grace stepped forward bravely. "John, I'm your sister. Put the scalpel down. You betrayed me. Grace, you hired investigators. You turned Rebecca against me. Rebecca turned against you when you tried to murder her." John's expression shifted between rage and something that might have been genuine confusion. "I never wanted to hurt anyone. I just needed the money." "For what?" Rebecca demanded. "We had everything. The house, the cars, the company." "The company is bankrupt," John said. "Has been for months. I've been using personal credit to keep it running." The truth hit Rebecca like a physical blow. "That's why you needed the life insurance money. I thought if something happened during childbirth, it would solve everything. Natural causes, no investigation." Sarah was slowly moving closer, the bedpan still raised. Except nothing about today was natural. "That was Madison's fault. She panicked. Did it wrong. There was no right way to murder your wife," Grace said fiercely. John's grip on the scalpel tightened. "I can still fix this. If Rebecca has a postpartum complication—" "You're insane," Rebecca said. "I'm desperate." Sarah lunged forward, using her military training to disarm John. The scalpel flew across the room as she tackled him to the ground. "Grace, help me restrain him," Sarah called out, but John was stronger than he looked. Fueled by desperation and adrenaline, he threw Sarah off and scrambled toward Rebecca and Emma. Rebecca backed into the bathroom, holding Emma tightly. She tried to close the door, but John was too fast. "Give me my daughter," John demanded. "No, she's my child too. You forfeited your rights when you tried to kill her." John reached for Emma, but Rebecca turned away, shielding the baby with her body. "Don't touch her." Emma was screaming now, overwhelmed by the chaos around her. Rebecca felt her maternal instincts override everything else. She would die before letting John hurt Emma. "Rebecca," John said, his voice suddenly gentle again. "I love you. I love our family. We can start over. After you tried to murder us, that wasn't real. It was just a backup plan, in case things got bad." Sarah had recovered and was advancing again, blood running from a cut on her forehead where she'd hit the floor. "John, you need professional help," Grace said. "Put down the scalpel and let us get you help." "I don't need help. I need my family." Police sirens were finally audible in the distance. Getting closer, John heard them too, and his expression changed to pure desperation. "If I can't have you," John said to Rebecca, "then no one can—" He raised the scalpel again, but this time Sarah was ready. She grabbed his wrist and twisted hard, using a combat technique that forced him to drop the weapon. "Stay down," Sarah ordered, pinning John to the floor. Grace kicked the scalpel away while calling out to the approaching police officers. "In here, 4th floor, room 408. Heavy footsteps thundered down the hallway. Detective Torres and a team of officers burst into the room, weapons drawn. "Police, nobody move." Sarah raised her hands slowly. "I'm restraining the suspect. I'm the one who called for help." Torres quickly assessed the situation and motioned for his officers to take John into custody. "John Sullivan, you're under arrest for attempted murder, breaking and entering, assault with a deadly weapon, and violation of a restraining order." As they handcuffed John, he looked directly at Rebecca. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Rebecca said with surprising strength. "You have no power over us anymore?" Emma had finally stopped crying and was looking around with wide, curious eyes. She seemed to sense that the danger had passed. "Are you injured?" Torres asked Rebecca. "No. Sarah protected us." Torres turned to Sarah with admiration. "Ma'am, that was impressive work." "Just doing my job," Sarah replied. "Protecting mother and baby." As they led John away, Rebecca felt a weight lifting from her chest that she hadn't even realized was there. The man who had controlled and terrorized her was gone. The threat to Emma was eliminated. "Is it really over?" Rebecca asked Grace. "It's over," Grace confirmed. "John will go to prison for a very long time." Rebecca looked down at Emma, who was now sleeping peacefully despite everything that had just happened. "She slept through her father being arrested," Rebecca said with dark humor. "She knows she's safe now," Sarah said. "Babies are smarter than we give them credit for." Dr. Hoffman arrived with additional security and a team of nurses to check on Rebecca and Emma's condition after the trauma. "Both mother and baby appear to be fine," Dr. Hoffman announced after her examination. "No physical harm done." But Rebecca knew the emotional healing would take much longer. As the chaos settled and the room returned to some semblance of normalcy, Rebecca made a decision that surprised even herself. "I want to press charges for everything," she told Detective Torres. "Every crime John committed, every law he broke, I want him to face the full consequences." "Are you sure it will mean testifying? Reliving all of this?" Rebecca looked at Emma sleeping in her arms. "I'm sure. No other woman should go through what I went through today." Torres nodded with respect. "We'll make sure John Sullivan never has the opportunity to hurt anyone again." As evening fell over the hospital, Rebecca finally began to believe that she and Emma were truly safe. But more than that, she began to realize that she was stronger than she had ever imagined. 3 days after John's arrest, Rebecca sat in a different hospital room, one with normal lighting, working door locks, and no need for armed guards. Emma nursed contentedly while Grace and Sarah worked on their laptops, handling the legal and practical aftermath of John's crimes. Detective Torres arrived with his final report and additional evidence that had been discovered during John's arrest. "Mrs. Sullivan," Torres said, settling into the visitor's chair, "we found some things you need to know about." Rebecca braced herself. "More bad news. Information that might actually help you understand the scope of what you survived." Torres opened a thick file folder. "John's plan was much more elaborate than we initially realized. He didn't just target you." Grace looked up from her laptop. "What do you mean?" "We found evidence that John has been systematically defrauding his company for over 2 years. Madison wasn't just his mistress, she was his business partner in embezzlement." Rebecca felt Emma's tiny hand grip her finger tighter, as if sensing her mother's tension. "How much money?" Grace asked. "Nearly $3 million, diverted to offshore accounts in Madison's name." The number was staggering. Rebecca tried to process the idea that John had been stealing millions while she worried about grocery budgets and college savings for Emma. "There's more," Torres continued. "We found evidence that you weren't John's first target." Rebecca's blood ran cold. "What does that mean?" John's previous girlfriend, Amanda Chen, died in a car accident 18 months ago. Single-car collision, no witnesses. She had recently discovered John's financial irregularities and was threatening to expose him. Grace dropped her pen. "You think John killed her too?" "The accident is being reinvestigated. Amanda's brake lines showed signs of tampering that were missed in the original investigation." Rebecca felt sick. "So I wasn't even special to him. I was just another obstacle to remove." "Actually," Torres said gently, "I think you were special. That's why he married you. Your life insurance policy was legitimate income, not stolen money. You represented a legal way out of his financial problems." The thought that John had married her specifically for her death benefits was somehow even more horrifying than random violence. "Mrs. Sullivan," Torres continued, "there's one more thing. We found John's personal journal during the search of his office." He handed her a leather-bound notebook filled with John's familiar handwriting. "You don't have to read it now," Torres said, "but it contains details about his relationship with you, his plans, and his state of mind leading up to the attack." Rebecca opened the journal to a random page and immediately closed it. Seeing John's clinical analysis of their marriage in his own handwriting was too painful to process while holding his daughter. "Can Grace review it first?" Rebecca asked. "Of course." Dr. Hoffman knocked and entered for Emma's daily checkup. The pediatric examination had become Rebecca's favorite part of each day, proof that her daughter was healthy and thriving despite everything. "How is our little fighter doing?" Dr. Hoffman asked, gently examining Emma's reflexes and responses. "She's perfect," Rebecca said. "Strong appetite, good sleep patterns. very alert. Any concerns from Mom? Rebecca hesitated. I keep checking her breathing. Constantly. I know it's probably normal new mother anxiety, but given what you experienced during labor, that's completely understandable. Dr. Hoffman said, your hypervigilance is actually a healthy protective response. Sarah looked up from her laptop where she was researching postnatal care resources. Rebecca, you survived an attempt on your life while giving birth. Being extra cautious about Emma's safety is smart, not paranoid. Detective Torres gathered his files to leave. Mrs. Sullivan, the district attorney wants to discuss your victim impact statement for John's sentencing hearing. When will that be? Probably 6 to 8 months from now. John's attorney is already discussing plea bargains, but the DA wants to pursue maximum charges. After Torres left, Rebecca finally felt ready to ask the questions that had been haunting her. Grace, how long did you really suspect something was wrong? Grace saved her work and turned to face Rebecca fully. Honestly, about a year. John started asking strange questions about your work schedule, your life insurance, your medical history, things that seemed innocent individually but felt odd as a pattern. Why didn't you say anything sooner? Because I hoped I was wrong. I hoped my brother wasn't capable of what I suspected. Rebecca understood. It was easier to doubt yourself than to believe someone you loved was evil. Sarah, Rebecca said, when you first saw the oxygen valve, did you immediately know it was sabotage? I knew it wasn't mechanical failure, Sarah replied, but I hoped it was gross negligence rather than deliberate malice. When I found Madison's badge, I couldn't deny the truth anymore. Emma finished nursing and looked up at Rebecca with those unfocused newborn eyes that seemed to see everything and nothing. What kind of world am I bringing you into? Sweetheart, Rebecca whispered. A world where people like Sarah and Grace and Dr. Hoffman fight to protect innocence, Grace said firmly. A world where justice exists. Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I'm sorry about John. You deserve better. Elizabeth, John's mother. Rebecca had forgotten about Elizabeth in all the chaos. Should I respond? Rebecca asked Grace. That's entirely up to you. Mom has been horrified by John's actions. She wants to maintain a relationship with Emma, but she understands if you need distance. Rebecca thought about it while Emma dozed against her chest. Elizabeth had always been kind to her. She didn't deserve to lose her granddaughter because of her son's crimes. I think I want to see her, Rebecca said. When I'm ready. Whenever you're ready, Grace agreed. Dr. Hoffman finished her examination and made notes in Emma's chart. Both mother and baby are cleared for discharge tomorrow, if you feel ready. The thought of leaving the hospital was both exciting and terrifying. Here, Rebecca felt protected. At home, she would have to rebuild a life without John's presence and without his threats. Grace, what's the status of the house? It's legally yours. John's arrest froze his assets, but the house was in both your names. You can stay there, sell it, whatever you choose. Rebecca tried to imagine returning to the home she had shared with John. His office where he had planned her murder. The nursery he had helped paint while knowing he intended to make Emma an orphan. I think I want to sell it, Rebecca said. Start fresh somewhere else. That's probably wise, Sarah agreed. Clean slate, new memories. Emma woke up and looked around the room with growing alertness. Rebecca marveled at how quickly babies adapted to their environment. Emma would never remember this hospital room, the fear, the chaos of her first days. She would grow up knowing only safety and love. I want to do something with my experience, Rebecca said suddenly. Help other women recognize the warning signs I missed. What do you mean? Grace asked. Domestic violence education, prenatal safety awareness. Something to prevent other women from going through what I went through, Sarah smiled. That's a beautiful way to transform trauma into purpose. Rebecca looked down at Emma, who was making tiny newborn sounds. I want her to grow up knowing that her mother fought back, that we didn't just survive, we made sure it wouldn't happen to other families. Grace reached over and squeezed Rebecca's hand. John thought he was destroying you. Instead, he revealed how strong you really are. As afternoon sunlight streamed through the hospital window, Rebecca felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope for the future. Emma would grow up safe, John would face justice, and Rebecca would rebuild her life on her own terms. The nightmare was ending, but the real story was just beginning. The house felt like a museum of lies. Rebecca stood in the doorway of what had been her and John's bedroom, holding 3-week-old Emma in her arms. Every object told a different story now. The wedding photo on the dresser, John's performance of devotion, the romantic vacation souvenirs purchased while he was already planning her death, the pregnancy books on his nightstand research for the perfect time to strike. "You don't have to do this today," Grace said gently. She had offered to pack Rebecca's belongings, but Rebecca needed to reclaim her own possessions, to choose what belonged in her new life. "I need to see it all," Rebecca replied. "I need to understand how blind I was." Sarah was in the kitchen, documenting the house's condition for the insurance company and the ongoing criminal investigation. Her military precision was evident in every carefully labeled box and photographed room. Emma stirred against Rebecca's chest, making the soft sounds that had become the soundtrack of Rebecca's new existence. The baby seemed unbothered by the emotional weight of the house. To Emma, this was just another environment to observe with her increasingly alert eyes. Rebecca moved to John's study, the room she had been discouraged from entering during their marriage. "I need space to work," John had always said. "Important documents that shouldn't be disturbed." Now she understood why. The study was almost empty. Police had seized computers, files, and anything else related to John's crimes. But traces remained: a prescription bottle for anxiety medication dated 6 months ago, a business card for a divorce attorney, a yellow legal pad with notes about life insurance claim procedures. "Rebecca," Grace called from the hallway, "you need to see this." Grace was holding a small recording device she had found taped under the kitchen table. "He was recording our conversations," Grace said grimly, "probably gathering evidence for some kind of defense strategy." Rebecca felt violated all over again. "How long has that been there?" "Based on the model, probably months." Sarah appeared from the basement. "I found more surveillance equipment, hidden cameras in the living room and master bedroom. This wasn't just about the murder plot he was documenting your entire life." The scale of John's deception kept expanding. Rebecca had thought she was living in a marriage. Instead, she had been living in an elaborate investigation of her own life. "Why would he record everything?" Rebecca asked. "Control," Sarah said simply. "Abusers often document their victims' behavior to use against them later. Gaslighting becomes easier when you can edit reality." Emma opened her eyes and looked directly at Rebecca, as if sensing her distress. Rebecca found comfort in that steady gaze. Emma was real. Emma's love was genuine. Everything else could be questioned, but not that. "I want to burn it all," Rebecca said suddenly. "The evidence," Grace asked. "No, everything else. All the furniture he chose, all the decorations he picked, all the objects he touched while planning to kill me." Grace and Sarah exchanged glances. "That's a perfectly healthy response," Sarah said. "You're reclaiming your space." They spent the afternoon sorting Rebecca's belongings into 3 categories: keep, donate, and destroy. Emma slept peacefully in her carrier, occasionally waking to observe the activity around her. Rebecca found photo albums from her and John's relationship. Looking at the pictures now was like watching a movie where she knew the ending. John's smiles looked calculated. His affection seemed performed. Even their wedding photos felt sinister. "I was so happy," Rebecca said, looking at a picture from their honeymoon. "I thought we were building something beautiful together." "You were building something beautiful," Grace said. "He was the one who poisoned it." Rebecca's phone rang. Detective Torres. "Mrs. Sullivan, I have an update on John's case." "What kind of update?" "His attorney contacted us about a plea bargain. John wants to plead guilty to attempted murder in exchange for a reduced sentence." "Sorna?" Rebecca felt her knees go weak. She sat down heavily in the chair beside Emma's carrier. "How reduced? 15 years instead of life without parole? And if I don't agree to the plea, then we go to trial. John could potentially receive a much longer sentence, but trials are unpredictable." Rebecca looked down at Emma, who was watching her with those alert newborn eyes. 15 years meant Emma would be in high school when John was released, still young enough for him to try to manipulate her. "I need time to think about it," Rebecca said. "Of course, but Mrs. Sullivan, there's something else. John wants to see Emma." Rebecca's blood went cold. Absolutely not. He's claiming parental rights. His attorney says denying visitation could complicate the plea negotiations. He tried to kill her. He tried to kill both of us. I know. The DA is fighting the request, but John's legal team is being aggressive about it. After Torres hung up, Rebecca sat in stunned silence. Even from jail, John was trying to control her life. What did Torres say? Grace asked. Rebecca explained the plea bargain and the visitation request. Grace's expression grew darker with each detail. Over my dead body, Grace said. I'll fight any visitation request with everything I have. Can he really claim parental rights after trying to murder his child? Legally, it's complicated, Grace admitted. But given the evidence against him, I doubt any judge would grant unsupervised visitation. Sarah was packing baby clothes into boxes, but Rebecca could see she was listening to every word. What do you think? Rebecca asked Sarah. I think John is trying to use Emma as leverage, Sarah said bluntly. He knows you'll do anything to protect her. He's betting you'll agree to the plea bargain to avoid a custody battle. The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity, even facing life in prison. John was still trying to control Rebecca through their daughter. I won't be manipulated anymore, Rebecca said firmly. If the DA thinks we can win at trial, I want to take that chance. Emma started crying, and Rebecca lifted her from the carrier. The weight of her daughter in her arms reminded Rebecca what she was fighting for. We're going to trial, Rebecca said. John is going to face the full consequences of what he did. Grace smiled with fierce approval. I'll call the DA tonight. As evening fell, they finished packing Rebecca's belongings. The house that had once felt like home now felt like a crime scene. But Rebecca was taking only what belonged to her and Emma. Everything else could burn. Where will you live? Sarah asked as they loaded boxes into Grace's car. I found a small house across town, Rebecca said. 2 bedrooms, good neighborhood, completely fresh start. What about work when you're ready? Rebecca had been thinking about that question for days. I want to go back to pediatric nursing eventually. But first, I want to create something new. A program to help pregnant women recognize domestic violence warning signs. That's ambitious, Grace said approvingly. I have something most advocates don't have, Rebecca replied. I survived the worst-case scenario. Other women need to know that survival is possible. Emma had fallen asleep against Rebecca's shoulder, completely trusting and peaceful. Rebecca marveled at her daughter's resilience, born into chaos but somehow untouched by it. She's going to be extraordinary, Sarah said, gently touching Emma's tiny hand. She already is, Rebecca replied. She survived John's attempt to kill her before she was even born. That makes her the strongest person I know. As they drove away from the house for the last time, Rebecca didn't look back. The past was evidence now, preserved for the trial that would finally hold John accountable. But the future belonged to her and Emma, and they were both going to be magnificent. The new house smelled like fresh paint and possibility. Rebecca stood in the empty living room, holding Emma while Sarah and Grace carried boxes through the front door. Sunlight streamed through windows that John had never looked through, illuminating hardwood floors his feet had never touched. This is our home, Rebecca whispered to Emma. Just ours. Emma was 6 weeks old now, more alert every day. Her eyes followed movements, and she was starting to make deliberate sounds rather than just crying. Rebecca thought she could see John's facial structure in Emma's features, but somehow it didn't disturb her. Emma was becoming her own person, separate from her father's legacy. Where do you want the nursery furniture? Sarah called from the hallway. The room with the eastern windows, Rebecca replied. Morning light for my early bird. Grace was assembling Emma's crib while consulting instructions with the focused intensity she usually reserved for legal documents. This is more complicated than contract law, Grace muttered. Need help, Sarah offered. I've got it. I'm just surprised baby furniture requires an engineering degree. Rebecca laughed, and the sound felt foreign in her throat. When was the last time she had laughed? Probably months before Emma was born. John had sucked the joy out of everything, so gradually she hadn't noticed until now. Rebecca, Sarah said, sitting beside her on the one piece of furniture they had moved, a rocking chair that had belonged to Rebecca's grandmother. How are you really doing? It was a question Rebecca had been avoiding, even in her own mind. I'm angry, Rebecca said finally. Angrier than I've ever been in my life. That's healthy. Anger is appropriate for what you've been through. But I'm also grateful. Every day I wake up, and Emma is alive, and I'm alive. And John's plan failed completely. Emma made a small sound and opened her eyes, looking directly at Rebecca with increasing recognition. She knows you're her safe person, Sarah observed. Sometimes I think about how different this would be if John had succeeded. Rebecca said, Emma would have grown up without me, probably thinking her father was a hero who lost his wife tragically. But that didn't happen. No, it didn't. Grace appeared in the doorway with a satisfied expression. One crib, successfully assembled, ready for royal occupancy. They moved Emma's belongings into the nursery. Rebecca had bought everything new, unwilling to use anything John had touched or chosen. The room was decorated in soft greens and yellows, colors that felt peaceful and hopeful. It's beautiful, Grace said. Emma's going to love growing up here. Rebecca's phone rang. Detective Torres again. Mrs. Sullivan, I have news about the trial. Good news or bad news? Mixed. John's attorney withdrew the plea bargain offer. They're going to fight the charges. Rebecca felt her stomach clench. What does that mean? It means John thinks he can win at trial. His defense strategy is going to be that Madison acted alone, that he was unaware of her plans. But that's impossible. We have evidence. We have strong evidence, Torres corrected. But John's team is claiming Madison fabricated the conspiracy to frame him. Rebecca sank into the rocking chair, Emma in her arms. How can they possibly argue that? They're saying Madison was obsessed with John, that she acted independently to eliminate you so she could have him? They're portraying John as another victim. The audacity was breathtaking. Even facing overwhelming evidence, John was trying to manipulate the narrative. When is the trial? 4 months from now. The DA wants to meet with you next week to prepare your testimony. After Torres hung up, Rebecca explained the situation to Grace and Sarah. He's unbelievable, Grace said. Even now, he's trying to control the story. Will the jury believe his defense? Rebecca asked. Not if I have anything to say about it, Grace replied grimly. I'm going to make sure the DA has every piece of evidence we can find. Sarah was unpacking Emma's clothes, organizing tiny outfits by size and season. The mundane task felt surreal against the backdrop of trial preparation. Rebecca, Sarah said, regardless of what happens at trial, you need to focus on building your life. Don't let John's legal strategy consume your energy. How do I do that when he's still trying to hurt me? By succeeding despite him, by raising Emma to be strong and healthy, by creating the advocacy program you talked about. Rebecca looked around the nursery. Everything was clean, new, hopeful. This was what she had built while John was sitting in jail, plotting his defense. You're right, Rebecca said. He can't touch this. He can't touch what we're building here. Emma started fussing, and Rebecca moved to the changing table they had just assembled. As she changed Emma's diaper, she talked softly to her daughter. Your daddy is going to try to make people believe lies about what he did. But we know the truth. We lived through it. And we're going to make sure the whole world knows what really happened. Emma looked up at her with those steady, alert eyes, as if she understood every word. Grace was setting up the baby monitor system with characteristic thoroughness. This connects to an app on your phone, she explained. You'll be able to hear Emma from anywhere in the house. And it records everything, just in case. The implication was clear. If John somehow gained access to Emma, every interaction would be documented. Sarah was assembling a changing station when her phone buzzed with a text message. Her expression changed as she read it. What is it? Rebecca asked. My Navy buddy who works in cybersecurity. He's been helping with the investigation. What did he find? John's internet search history from his work computer. The searches go back 8 months. Rebecca felt dread building in her chest. What kind of searches? How to cause oxygen failure during childbirth? Symptoms of pregnancy complications? Life insurance claim procedures after accidental death? The systematic planning was horrifying. John hadn't acted impulsively or under pressure. He had researched Rebecca's murder with the same attention to detail he applied to business projects. There's more, Sarah continued. He also searched for information about pregnancy-related domestic violence. He was researching how to abuse you without leaving evidence. Rebecca felt Emma's weight in her arms and drew strength from it. John had tried to destroy them both, but they were here, together, building a life he couldn't touch. "We're going to testify about all of this at trial," Rebecca said firmly. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" Grace asked. "It will mean reliving everything in front of a jury." "I'm ready. Emma deserves to know that her mother fought for justice." As evening approached, they had transformed the empty house into a home. Emma's nursery was complete. Rebecca's bedroom was furnished with things that brought her comfort. The kitchen was stocked with food she had chosen. "It feels different from the other house," Rebecca said as they sat in the living room, Emma sleeping peacefully in her carrier. "How so?" Sarah asked. "That house always felt like I was a guest in John's space. This feels like mine." Grace gathered her purse and keys to leave. "You know I'm proud of you, right? For what? For rebuilding? For fighting back? For refusing to let John's evil define your life." After Grace left, Sarah settled into the couch with her laptop. "I'm going to stay tonight, if that's okay." First night in a new house can be unsettling. Rebecca was grateful for the company. As independent as she was becoming, the transition from victim to survivor wasn't complete yet. "Sarah," Rebecca said as they prepared for bed, "do you think we'll win at trial?" "I think you already won," Sarah replied. "John tried to destroy you, and instead you're stronger than ever. Everything else is just legal formality." Rebecca checked on Emma one final time before going to sleep. Her daughter was breathing steadily, peacefully, unaware of the legal battles and emotional healing still ahead. "Sweet dreams, little fighter," Rebecca whispered. "Tomorrow we start building the life you deserve." Outside, the neighborhood was quiet and safe. Inside, Rebecca felt something she hadn't experienced in months: complete peace. John was locked away. Emma was healthy and thriving. And Rebecca was discovering she was capable of far more than she had ever imagined. The future stretched ahead of them, full of possibilities John had never considered. The courthouse buzzed with activity on the morning of John Sullivan's trial. Rebecca sat in the witness preparation room, holding Emma close while reviewing her testimony one final time. At 4 months old, Emma was alert and curious, watching the unfamiliar surroundings with wide, intelligent eyes. "Remember," District Attorney Patricia Chen said, "just tell the truth. John's defense team will try to confuse you, but stick to what you experienced." Grace sat beside Rebecca, radiating protective energy. "If you feel overwhelmed at any point, ask for a break. You control the pace of your testimony." Sarah paced near the window, her military bearing evident as she prepared for her own testimony. The evidence speaks for itself. John's internet searches, Madison's confession, the physical evidence from the hospital, it's overwhelming. "Has anyone heard from Madison recently?" Rebecca asked. "She's testifying for the prosecution," DHN replied. Her attorney negotiated a reduced sentence in exchange for her cooperation. Rebecca felt mixed emotions about seeing Madison again. Anger at her participation in the murder plot, but also a strange recognition that Madison had been manipulated by John too. Emma fussed slightly, and Rebecca adjusted her position. "I know, sweetheart. This is scary for Mama too." A bailiff knocked on the door. "Mrs. Sullivan, they're ready for you." Rebecca handed Emma to Grace and took a deep breath. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the chance to tell the world exactly what John Sullivan had done. The courtroom was packed. Rebecca recognized faces from the hospital, colleagues from her nursing job, and reporters who had been following the case. But most importantly, she saw the jury, 12 people who would decide John's fate. John sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, looking nothing like the desperate man who had burst into her hospital room with a scalpel. His attorney, Patricia Wright, was known for defending white-collar criminals and getting them reduced sentences. "Mrs. Sullivan," DHN began, "please tell the jury about your relationship with the defendant." Rebecca spoke clearly and calmly, describing how she met John, their courtship, marriage, and pregnancy. She painted a picture of what seemed like a normal relationship, setting the stage for the horror that followed. "When did you first suspect something was wrong?" "During labor, when the oxygen equipment failed. My doula, Sarah Mitchell, immediately recognized that it wasn't a mechanical malfunction. What made Ms. Mitchell suspicious? The valve had been manually turned off. The safety lock was disengaged. Both required deliberate action. John's attorney objected several times, trying to break Rebecca's rhythm, but Rebecca remained focused. She described finding Madison's employee badge, the surveillance device in the flowers, and John's strange behavior throughout her labor. Mrs. Sullivan, did you ever suspect your husband was having an affair? Looking back, there were signs: working late constantly, taking mysterious phone calls, being emotionally distant, but I trusted him. I never imagined he was planning to kill me. The courtroom was completely silent as Rebecca described the second oxygen failure, John's arrival at the hospital, and her growing realization that her husband wanted her dead. How did you feel when you learned the truth? Rebecca looked directly at the jury, betrayed, terrified, but also determined to protect my daughter. Defense attorney Wright began her cross-examination with a sympathetic tone. Mrs. Sullivan, I'm sorry for what you've been through. But isn't it possible that you misinterpreted the events at the hospital due to the stress of labor? Rebecca had prepared for this question. No. Sarah Mitchell is a former Navy corpsman with combat medical experience. Dr. Hoffman has 20 years of obstetric experience. They both confirmed that the equipment was deliberately tampered with. But you have no direct evidence that my client was involved in any tampering. Do you? I have evidence that he planned my murder for months. His internet searches, his financial motives, his coordination with Madison Pierce. Wright tried several more angles, suggesting that Rebecca was confused, that Madison acted alone, that John was an innocent victim of circumstances. But Rebecca's testimony remained consistent and powerful. When Rebecca finished testifying, she felt emotionally drained but proud. She had told Emma's story as much as her own, the story of a baby who survived a murder attempt before she was even born. Sarah's testimony was devastating to John's defense. Her military credentials gave her enormous credibility, and her technical explanation of the oxygen tampering left no room for doubt. The valve mechanism requires two separate actions to disable, Sarah explained to the jury. First, the safety lock must be disengaged. Then the main valve must be turned completely off. This cannot happen accidentally. In your professional opinion, was this sabotage? Absolutely. This was deliberate, knowledgeable tampering designed to cause respiratory distress. Wright tried to challenge Sarah's qualifications, but Sarah's combat experience and medical training made her unshakable. Madison Pierce's testimony was the most dramatic moment of the trial. She looked pale and haunted as she described the conspiracy. John said if something happened to Rebecca during childbirth, it would look natural, Madison said quietly. Medical complications. These things happen. How long did you plan Mrs. Sullivan's murder? About 6 months. John researched everything. How long oxygen deprivation would take, what it would look like, how to make it seem accidental. And your role in the plan, I was supposed to disable the oxygen during the critical phase of labor. John said it would only take a few minutes. The prosecutor played recordings of phone calls between John and Madison, discussing timing, access to the hospital, and what to do if their plan failed. We tried twice, Madison said, tears streaming down her face. When Sarah Mitchell kept restoring the oxygen, John said we'd have to find another way. Wright tried to portray Madison as an obsessed employee acting alone, but the evidence of coordination was overwhelming. The prosecution's final piece of evidence was John's internet search history, presented by a cybersecurity expert. Mr. Sullivan conducted extensive research into pregnancy-related deaths, the expert testified. Searches included oxygen failure during labor, natural causes of maternal death, and life insurance claims for accidental death. When were these searches conducted? Starting 8 months ago and continuing until the day before Mrs. Sullivan went into labor. Wright's defense was predictable but weak. She argued that John was innocent, that Madison had acted alone out of obsession, and that the prosecution's case was based on circumstantial evidence. But when John took the stand in his own defense, his performance was unconvincing. He claimed to know nothing about Madison's plan, despite overwhelming evidence of their coordination. Mr. Sullivan, the prosecutor said during cross-examination, you researched how to kill your wife for months. You coordinated with Madison Pierce to access the hospital. You disabled security systems on the night of the attack. How do you explain this evidence? I don't know what you're talking about, John said, but his composure was cracking. You tried to murder your pregnant wife and unborn child for insurance money. Isn't that true? That's completely false. But the jury could see through his lies. John's arrogance and lack of genuine emotion worked against him. Grace testified about John's financial crimes in the private investigation she had conducted. Detective Torres presented the physical evidence. Dr. Hoffman described the medical impossibility of accidental oxygen failure. After 3 days of testimony, the case went to the jury. Rebecca waited in the courthouse cafe with Emma, who was now old enough to smile and make happy sounds. Strangers approached to offer support, and Rebecca realized her case had become a symbol for other women facing domestic violence. "Whatever happens," Grace said, "you've already won. You survived. Emma survived. You exposed John's crimes. I just want justice," Rebecca replied. "I want other women to know that fighting back is possible." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the 4 women stood with the verdict. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. Rebecca closed her eyes and held Emma closer. Justice. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant guilty. More guilty verdicts followed. Attempted murder of an unborn child, assault with a deadly weapon, embezzlement, corporate fraud. John's face remained impassive, but Rebecca could see the fear in his eyes. His plan had failed completely. Judge Patricia Morrison scheduled sentencing for the following month, but she denied bail immediately. "Mr. Sullivan, you pose a continuing threat to your wife and daughter. You will remain in custody until sentencing." As they led John away in handcuffs, he looked directly at Rebecca for the first time during the trial. "This isn't over," he mouthed silently. But Rebecca wasn't afraid anymore. She stood up, holding Emma, and mouthed back, "Yes, it is." Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered for statements. Rebecca had prepared remarks, but when the moment came, she spoke from her heart. "My daughter was born into a world where her father tried to kill her before she even took her first breath. But she was also born into a world where people like Sarah Mitchell and Dr. Hoffman and Detective Torres fight to protect innocence." Emma gurgled happily in Rebecca's arms, unaware of the cameras and microphones. "John Sullivan thought he could destroy us for money. Instead, he created 2 survivors who will spend our lives making sure other families are protected." "What's next for you and Emma?" a reporter asked. Rebecca looked down at her daughter, who was reaching for the sunlight streaming through the courthouse windows. "We're going to build something beautiful," Rebecca said. "We're going to live the life he tried to steal from us." As they walked away from the courthouse, Rebecca felt lighter than she had in months. Emma was healthy and thriving. John was convicted and facing decades in prison, and their future stretched ahead, full of possibilities. "You did it," Sarah said, walking beside them. "You got justice." "We all did it," Rebecca corrected. "You, Grace, Dr. Hoffman, Detective Torres, everyone who refused to let John's lies become the truth." Emma made a happy sound and smiled at her mother, as if she understood that they were celebrating. The nightmare was finally over. The real life was just beginning. 1 year later, Rebecca stood at the podium of the National Domestic Violence Prevention Conference, holding a microphone in one hand and Emma's tiny fingers in the other. At 16 months old, Emma was walking, babbling constantly, and showing the fearless curiosity that characterized her personality. "My name is Rebecca Sullivan," she began, looking out at an audience of advocates, medical professionals, and survivors. 16 months ago, my husband tried to murder me and my unborn daughter during labor." The auditorium was completely silent. Emma played quietly with a soft toy, oblivious to the weight of her mother's words. "Today, I want to tell you about the Sullivan Foundation for Prenatal Safety and how we're working to make sure no other family experiences what we survived." Rebecca's presentation included the warning signs she had missed, the medical protocols that had saved their lives, and the legal precedents established by John's conviction. But more than anything, she talked about hope. "Domestic violence doesn't end when the abuser goes to jail," Rebecca explained. "Recovery is a daily choice to build something better than what was stolen from us." After her presentation, Rebecca was surrounded by women sharing their own stories. Some were pregnant and afraid. Others were survivors seeking resources. All of them found inspiration in Rebecca's transformation from victim to advocate. Sarah approached with Dr. Hoffman, both of them beaming with pride. "That was incredible," Dr. Hoffman said. "You've become quite the public speaker." "I had good teachers," Rebecca replied, shifting Emma to her other hip. "You both taught me that surviving isn't enough. You have to thrive." The Sullivan Foundation had grown beyond Rebecca's wildest expectations. What started as a simple idea had become a comprehensive program training medical professionals to recognize domestic violence during pregnancy. Hospitals across the country were implementing the safety protocols Sarah had developed. Emma pointed at Sarah and said, "Mama," one of her favorite words. "That's right, sweetheart," Rebecca said. "Aunt Sarah is one of your mamas too." Grace appeared with a stack of business cards from people wanting to learn more about the foundation. As Rebecca's legal counsel and business partner, Grace had helped navigate the complex world of nonprofit organizations. "We have 3 more hospitals requesting training next month," Grace reported, "and the medical journal wants to publish your article about pregnancy-related domestic violence." Rebecca's life had taken directions she never could have imagined during those terrifying hours in the labor room, but every achievement felt like a victory over John's attempt to destroy her. "Any word on John's appeal?" Rebecca asked. Grace shook her head. "His attorney filed the paperwork, but legal experts think it's hopeless. The evidence was too overwhelming." John had been sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Madison received 25 years. Both were serving their sentences in maximum security facilities, with no contact allowed with Rebecca or Emma. "Good," Rebecca said simply. "Emma deserves to grow up without that shadow." As if summoned by her name, Emma looked up at her mother and smiled the radiant smile that had become Rebecca's daily motivation. "Mama," Emma said clearly, reaching for Rebecca's face. "Yes, baby girl. Mama's right here." The conference continued around them, but Rebecca took a moment to absorb the scene. A year ago, she had been fighting for her life in a hospital room. Today, she was training others to save lives. A young woman approached hesitantly, clearly pregnant and nervous. "Mrs. Sullivan, I'm Maria. I heard your presentation, and I think my husband might be planning something similar." Rebecca's attention focused completely on Maria. This was why she did the work for women like this, who recognized the warning signs before it was too late. "Let's find somewhere quiet to talk," Rebecca said gently. They moved to a private conference room, where Rebecca listened to Maria's story with the expertise of someone who had lived through the worst-case scenario. "He's been asking strange questions about my life insurance," Maria said, "and he seems to know too much about pregnancy complications. Things I never told him." Rebecca felt the familiar chill of recognition. "Have you told anyone else about your concerns? I wasn't sure if I was being paranoid." "You're not being paranoid. Trust your instincts." Rebecca handed Maria a card for the Foundation's emergency hotline. "We have resources that can help keep you safe." Sarah joined them and immediately began safety planning with Maria. Watching Sarah work reminded Rebecca of that crucial day when military training and maternal instinct had combined to save 2 lives. After Maria left with a comprehensive safety plan and multiple support contacts, Rebecca felt the deep satisfaction that came with potentially preventing a tragedy. "Another family protected," Sarah said with quiet pride. "It never gets old," Rebecca agreed. Emma had fallen asleep in her stroller, exhausted by the day's activities. Rebecca looked down at her daughter and marveled at the person Emma was becoming. Confident, curious, completely trusting that the world was safe because her mother made it so. "She looks like you," Grace observed. "Thank God," Rebecca replied. "I was worried she'd inherit John's features. She inherited your strength instead." As the conference wound down, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought them here. John's conviction had been final 6 months ago. The foundation was thriving. Emma was healthy and happy. But more than any external achievement, Rebecca had rebuilt herself into someone stronger than she'd ever imagined possible. Her phone buzzed with a text from Elizabeth Sullivan, John's mother. They had rebuilt their relationship carefully, with clear boundaries about John's crimes. "Saw your speech online. So proud of you and Emma. Love, Grandma Elizabeth." Rebecca smiled. Elizabeth had never tried to excuse John's actions, and she had become a generous supporter of the foundation. Emma would grow up knowing her grandmother's love, separate from her father's legacy. "Ready to head home?" Grace asked. Home was the house Rebecca had bought after selling the one she'd shared with John. It was filled with laughter, safety, and the sound of Emma's endless chatter. John had never been there. His influence couldn't touch it. As they packed up their materials, a journalist approached for a final interview. "Mrs. Sullivan, what would you want other domestic violence survivors to know?" Rebecca considered the question while Emma slept peacefully in her arms. "I'd want them to know that the person who tried to destroy you doesn't get to define what you become," Rebecca said. "Emma and I could have been statistics of murder-suicide that people forgot about in a few weeks. Instead, we became advocates who've helped save other families." "Sahuri, what's next for the Sullivan Foundation?" "We're launching a program to train doulas in domestic violence recognition. Sarah's developing protocols that could prevent what happened to us from happening to other women." As they left the conference center, Emma woke up and looked around with alert, curious eyes. She pointed at birds flying overhead and babbled excitedly about the new sights. "Look, Emma," Rebecca said, following her daughter's gaze. "They're flying free." Emma clapped her hands in delight, and Rebecca felt the metaphor settle into truth. They were flying free, too free from John's control, free from fear, free to build whatever life they chose. The drive home took them past the hospital where Emma was born. Rebecca no longer felt trauma when she saw the building. Instead, she felt gratitude for the people who had saved them and pride in how far they'd traveled since that terrifying day. "Mama," Emma said, pointing at the hospital. She was learning to identify places and people in her world. "That's where you were born, sweetheart," Rebecca said. "That's where our real life began." At home, Rebecca put Emma down for her nap and settled into her home office to review the Foundation's latest reports. 3 more hospitals had implemented their safety protocols. 2 women had used the emergency hotline to escape dangerous situations. A medical school was adding their curriculum to required coursework. Each number represented a life potentially saved, a family potentially protected. John had tried to end 2 lives for money. Instead, he had inspired a movement that would save countless others. Rebecca's phone rang. Detective Torres, calling with his monthly update. "Rebecca, I have news about the Amanda Chen investigation." Amanda was John's previous girlfriend, whose death was being reinvestigated based on evidence from his trial. "They found evidence that John tampered with her car," Torres said. "The DA is filing posthumous murder charges." "Will that affect his sentence?" "No. He's already serving life without parole. But Amanda's family will finally have justice." After Torres hung up, Rebecca felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that Amanda's death hadn't been forgotten. Anger that John had killed before and would have killed again. Gratitude that his pattern of violence had finally been stopped. Emma woke from her nap in the happy mood that characterized most of her days. She had no memory of the danger she'd survived, no knowledge of the father who had tried to kill her. She knew only love, safety, and the certainty that her mother would protect her. "Mama," Emma said, reaching for Rebecca with complete trust. "Yes, baby girl. Mama's here. Mama's always here." As evening approached, Rebecca prepared Emma's dinner while reviewing speaking requests for the Foundation. Universities, medical conferences, law enforcement training programs, everyone wanted to hear how they had survived and what others could learn from their experience. Emma ate with the messy enthusiasm of a toddler, babbling constantly about her day. She was learning new words every week, and Rebecca documented each milestone with the devotion of a mother who almost lost the chance. "Say strong," Rebecca encouraged during bath time. "Trong?" Emma replied proudly. "That's right. You're strong. Mama's strong. We're both strong." Emma clapped her hands, delighted with her accomplishment. As Rebecca tucked Emma into her crib for the night, she thought about all the bedtime routines John would never experience. The first steps he'd missed, the first words he'd never hear, the hugs and kisses he'd forfeited when he chose greed over love. "Sweet dreams, my brave girl," Rebecca whispered. "Tomorrow we'll keep making the world safer for other babies like you." Emma fell asleep holding her favorite stuffed animal, a Navy bear that Sarah had given her, symbolizing protection and courage. Rebecca sat in the rocking chair beside Emma's crib, listening to her daughter's peaceful breathing. This was the sound John had tried to silence forever. Instead, it had become the soundtrack of Rebecca's purpose. Her phone displayed a photo that had been taken at the conference, Rebecca speaking passionately while Emma played contentedly nearby. Mother and daughter, survivors and advocates, building something beautiful from the ashes of attempted destruction. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet and safe. Inside, two lives that should have ended were thriving beyond anyone's imagination. John Sullivan had believed he could write their story's ending. Instead, Rebecca and Emma were writing new chapters every day, chapters filled with hope, purpose, and the unshakable knowledge that love was stronger than evil. The oxygen flowed freely. The future stretched ahead unlimited, and somewhere in the darkness, other women would find courage in their story of survival. The nightmare was over. The legacy was just beginning. Rebecca and Emma's story didn't end in that hospital room. It began there. Today, the Sullivan Foundation has helped save dozens of families by training medical professionals to recognize the warning signs Rebecca missed. If this story moved you, if it opened your eyes to dangers you never considered, please hit that like button to help other women find this story. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment telling us what shocked you most, and don't forget to subscribe with notifications on, because these true survival stories could save lives. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against evil is simply knowing it exists.